Ava pushed through the glass doors of her office building, her heels clicking confidently on the polished pavement as she moved with purpose toward the curb. The midday sun reflected off the windows above where a few co-workers stood sipping coffee, their eyes fixed on her. She didn't glance up, but she could feel the weight of their gaze. The same silent judgment she'd grown used to. At the curb, a modest black sedan idled. James stepped out the moment he saw her. Dressed in a plain gray jacket and dark jeans, he moved with a casual grace that felt completely unbothered by the world watching. He opened the door for her without a word. Ava slid in, giving him a soft smile. "Thanks," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. James shut the door gently, walked around, and got into the driver's seat. As they pulled off, Ava glanced at her phone. A new message blinked from her coworker Brielle. "Is that the Uber guy again?" She ignored it. Back at the office earlier that week, the whispers had gotten bolder. During a team lunch, Nate, always the loud one, had smirked across the table. "So Ava, still going strong with your chauffeur?" The table chuckled. Ava had smiled politely, then continued cutting her salad without looking up. She had no interest in feeding their curiosity. James wasn't a secret. He wasn't a scandal. But in their world, a world of designer watches and networking brunches, he was an anomaly. Ava knew what they thought. She just didn't care. James made her laugh when her day was too heavy. He listened without interrupting, and he never asked for more than she was ready to give. That evening, Ava and James sat quietly in a park, sharing a paper cup of fries. She leaned into him, his arm loosely around her shoulders. He pointed to a dog failing to catch a frisbee, and laughed. "That's me trying to be serious for more than an hour," he joked. She laughed too, soft and genuine. "You're more serious than anyone I know. Only when I'm with you," he said, handing her the last fry. The weekend arrived, and Ava joined her closest friends for a dinner gathering. Candlelight flickered on the long table as plates clinked and wine flowed. Conversation buzzed around career moves, summer travel, and the latest engagement in their circle. Then Camille leaned over with a smirk, swirling her red wine. "So, Ava," she said, "still playing Cinderella? Or did your driver finally turn into a prince?" The table laughed. Not loud, not cruel, just amused. Ava paused, placing her napkin on the table slowly. She looked Camille directly in the eye. "He doesn't need to turn into anything," she said calmly. "He's already better than most of the suits I've met." The laughter faded. Camille's smile tightened. Ava reached for her glass, held it for a moment, then continued. "He's kind, he listens, and he doesn't care about anyone's resume. I like that about him." Someone coughed. Another changed the topic. But the message was clear. Ava wasn't ashamed. Later, walking back to her car alone, she called James. He picked up after the first ring. "Hey," he said, voice warm. "Hey," she replied. "Just wanted to hear your voice." "Dinner that bad?" She smiled faintly, stepping into the night. "Let's just say I'm glad I'm not spending my life trying to impress people I don't even like." James chuckled on the other end. "I'll have dinner ready, and no one's going to ask about your job title. That's why you're my favorite," she said. She hung up and stood still for a moment, letting the city lights blur in the background. She wasn't living a fairy tale. She was living something real, and that mattered more. It had been a long night. One of those meetings that stretch well past dinner, with clients demanding revisions and higher-ups pretending it was all a team effort. Ava stepped out of the glass tower with tired eyes and aching feet, holding her heels in one hand as she called for a ride. She was half asleep by the time the car pulled up. James barely said a word when she got in. He noticed how she dropped, her bag without care, how her voice was too hoarse to talk, and how she let her head fall back like she was holding in frustration. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke. "Tough day?" Ava opened her eyes halfway, blinking at the rearview mirror. That obvious? You sighed 3 times before we left the block. She smirked. Impressive observation. Part of the job, he said with a slight grin. Something in his tone made her pause. It wasn't the usual driver chatter. He didn't try to flatter or flirt. He sounded like someone who saw things clearly and didn't need to pretend. Do you drive full-time? She asked. Sometimes. When I need a break from everything else. Break from what? He glanced at her in the mirror again. That's a long story. I like long stories, she replied, relaxing into the seat. That was how it started. The next time she booked a ride late at night, she recognized his name on the app and smiled. You again? Looks like the algorithm likes us, he replied. It turned into a pattern. Long nights, rides that ended with coffee. Then one evening, when her meeting got canceled last minute, they ended up sharing a meal at a small diner, near her apartment. Ava learned he liked quiet places, late walks, and books about architecture, even though he didn't call himself an architect. He asked questions no one else did. He listened without interrupting. He didn't care about her resume, just her stories. In one of their early dinners, she asked, "Why do you keep driving when you obviously don't have to?" He shrugged. I like watching the city change through people. Everyone's in a rush. I'm not, she tilted her head. That sounds poetic, James chuckled. It's practical. I get to stay invisible. It's nice sometimes. Their connection wasn't instant fireworks. It was quiet, built on a strange comfort. The more she saw him, the less she wanted to be anywhere else. Back in the present, things had changed. At work, people weren't whispering anymore. They were sharing. A photo had made it into the company Slack group. James holding the car door open for her outside the office. The caption read, CEO Energy, with a discount ride. The laughter was subtle but everywhere. Emails loaded slower when she entered the room. Jokes paused mid-sentence. One executive made a chauffeur joke during a presentation. The whole room chuckled. Ava tried to brush it off, but it stung. Her achievements were suddenly secondary. Her choices questioned. Her silence mistaken for shame. One afternoon, as she sat in the break room scrolling through reports, Camille walked in. She poured herself a coffee, then leaned on the counter. You know they're only laughing because they don't get it, right? She said. Ava didn't look up. Get what? Why someone like you would date someone like him? Now Ava looked up. Camille shrugged. It's not about money. It's about image. You've worked your way up. People expect you to be with someone who looks like that journey. And what does James look like? Ava asked. Camille hesitated. He looks like he doesn't belong in your world. Ava stood up, tossing her cup. Maybe that's why I like him. But that didn't make the whispers stop. If anything, they grew sharper. During a board prep meeting, one of the consultants, a man named Harris who barely remembered her name, last year, leaned across the table and said with a grin, "Just be careful, Ava. Some people start dating down and forget how to climb up." She blinked slowly. Excuse me? He laughed like it was harmless. I'm just saying, people are watching. Every move matters, especially who you bring into your life. She kept her voice level. Then maybe they should watch something else. After the meeting, her closest colleague, Priya, pulled her aside. They had been friends since their intern days, always covering for each other, always honest. Ava, she said carefully, you know I've always had your back. I know, and I'm not saying you're wrong for seeing James. He seems, kind, but you're too smart to throw it all away for a guy with no future. Ava's chest tightened. No future? Priya hesitated. You know what I mean. You've built something big. Don't let a relationship become a liability. Ava didn't reply. She just nodded and walked away. That night, She sat in James's apartment, staring at her untouched food while he played music softly in the background. He could tell something was off, but didn't press. She finally looked up at him. "Do you ever feel like people think they know your worth based on what they see?" He raised an eyebrow. "Every day," she exhaled. "I feel like I'm being judged by people who don't even know me. Or you." James turned the music down. "Then stop letting them rent space in your head." Ava leaned back. "Easier said than done." He smiled faintly. "You're not the one who needs to change." But even as he said it, the weight of the world outside their little bubble pressed in. Ava didn't want to admit it, but the pressure was getting harder to carry. James lived in a quiet neighborhood tucked between older brownstones and small local cafes. The building was simple. No doorman, no flash, just clean walls and soft lighting in the hallway. When Ava stepped inside his apartment for the first time, she was surprised. Not because it was luxurious. It wasn't. But because of how intentional everything felt. The bookshelves were filled, not with trendy titles, but with volumes on architecture, city planning, history. A small table in the corner held a chessboard mid-game. A worn leather chair sat next to a lamp with a cracked base, clearly repaired with care. James tossed his keys into a wooden bowl by the door and offered her a drink. "Water? Tea?" "Tea sounds great," Ava said, walking further in. She touched the edge of a photo frame, a black and white image of a street she didn't recognize. "You took this?" He glanced over. "Yeah, from a trip a few years back." "Romania." She raised an eyebrow. "You've been to Romania?" "Spent 3 months there helping restore old churches. Volunteer program." Ava turned slowly to face him. "You never talk about that kind of stuff." James shrugged. "Most people don't ask." She smiled faintly. "Well, I'm asking now." Over tea, they talked about cities, people, how sidewalks tell stories. He listened in a way that made her feel seen, even when she wasn't saying much. When she spoke about a frustrating investor pitch, he didn't offer advice, just nodded and asked what she wanted to do next. It wasn't the first time she felt like she was falling for him, but it was the first time she realized how much he was holding back. The next morning at the office, Ava walked into the weekly strategy sync and paused. The conference room was already full, and her seat, usually reserved next to the director, was taken. She checked the time. She was on schedule. But her name wasn't on the new agenda, nor had she received the calendar invite that everyone else had clearly gotten. She stood in the doorway for a second before one of the assistants, trying to avoid her gaze, mouthed, "Sorry." It hit her in the gut. Afterward, she cornered Priya in the hallway. "Did I get pulled from this week's review?" Priya looked uncomfortable. "They reshuffled the team, said they needed more optics-friendly representation in front of the board." Ava narrowed her eyes. "Meaning?" Priya didn't say it. She didn't have to. That night, Ava sat on her couch, scrolling mindlessly through her phone. A notification from a gossip blog caught her attention. She clicked. There. It was a photo of her and James again. Only this time the headline read, "Top exec dating below her pay grade. Is love blind or just reckless?" The article was short, but biting. An anonymous commenter had written, "He's clearly in it for the upgrade. She should know better." She stared at the screen, heat rising in her chest. Not because of the insult, she could handle that, but because it was spreading. Her world was small, and in it, this kind of story traveled fast. Later that night she brought it up while they were watching a movie. She muted the volume and turned to James. "Why don't you ever talk about what you used to do?" she asked. James didn't look surprised. "We've had this conversation." "Not really," she said. "You dodge it every time." He leaned back, folding his arms. "What do you want to know, Ava?" She paused. "I want to know who I'm defending. Because I'm defending you a lot these days." His jaw tightened slightly. I'm just a guy who decided not to chase what everyone else thought mattered. That sounds like a line from a brochure, she said, trying to lighten the tone. It didn't work. James stood and walked to the window. Do you think if I had a different title they'd respect you more? I think, Ava said slowly, that if they knew more, they'd back off. He turned to face her. So you want me to put on a suit and tell stories I've worked hard to forget, just to make them more comfortable? She didn't answer. He softened. I'm not ashamed of anything I've done, but I'm not going to perform for people who don't matter. But they do matter, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. To me, they matter. Because my career depends on their opinions, their decisions. And right now, their opinions are becoming obstacles. James nodded slowly. That's fair. There was silence between them. The next day, Ava sat at her desk, trying to focus on a spreadsheet when her assistant dropped off an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a cream-colored invitation. You are cordially invited to the Vanguard Elite Gala, Saturday. Please RSVP. Attendee, Ava Sinclair. Guest, there was a blank space where a name should be. She checked the guest list. Everyone else had a +1. Hers was left empty. She placed the envelope down carefully, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't know what to feel. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls, light scattering across champagne glasses and perfectly tailored suits. Ava walked in alone, her gown a smooth blend of silver and midnight, her heels echoing across the marble floor. Heads turned, not in admiration, but in recognition. Whispers trailed her like a veil. She smiled politely, nodded at familiar faces, and walked with measured calm, though she felt every glance scrape against her skin. The air was rich with perfume and judgment. She paused near the edge of the hall, pretending to study a floral arrangement, but really just catching her breath. That's when she saw him. James stood across the room near the side exit, half in shadow. He wasn't on the guest list, not part of the crowd, not mingling or sipping champagne. But he was there, in a dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. He didn't smile. He just watched. Ava blinked, unsure if she was imagining him. But then someone stepped in front of her and the moment passed. When she looked again, he was gone. Earlier that day, James had walked through the city in silence, hands in his pockets, stopping only when he reached a corner cafe near an old bookstore. A man sitting by the window noticed him, did a double take, and stepped out. James? The man asked, brows raised. Is that really you? James froze. Wow. It's been, what, 3 years? 4? The man laughed lightly. Didn't expect to see you walking around like this. James smiled faintly. Been keeping low. The man looked at him closely, then leaned in. You're hiding again, aren't you? James didn't answer, just adjusted his jacket and looked away. You can't avoid it forever, you know. You don't get to just disappear and pretend it never happened. I'm not pretending, James said quietly. I'm choosing. The man shook his head. Still stubborn. James gave a small nod and walked away without another word. Back in the ballroom, Ava made her way to the terrace, away from the crowd and cameras. The cool air kissed her shoulders as she gripped the railing, letting the buzz inside fade into muffled music. She didn't belong here tonight. Not like this. An hour later, she walked into her apartment and found James already there, sitting on the couch, flipping through a book she'd left open. He looked up when she entered. They locked eyes for a long moment before either of them spoke. You came to the gala, she said quietly, stepping out of her heels. I wanted to see something, he replied. What? How far you'd go to pretend everything was fine? Ava crossed her arms. That's not fair. James nodded. Maybe not. Why were you hiding in the corner? Why were you pretending I wasn't there? She sat down across from him, tension thick between them. "I didn't know if you wanted to be seen." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What I have doesn't matter to people who only see what I look like." Ava looked at him, searching for something beneath the surface. "That line again." "It's not a line," he said calmly. "It's my life." "Then tell me the rest of it. Tell me what I don't know." James looked away. "I'm not asking because I want a show," Ava said. "I'm asking because I'm standing in front of people defending a man who won't even stand beside me." Silence settled over them. James finally spoke. "You think if I gave you a name, a company, a fortune, all this judgment would stop?" "I think," she said softly, "that if we're going to do this, really do this, I need to know why you're still running." He sighed. "Because once I stop, people stop seeing me. They see numbers. They see inheritance. They see power. I've watched people treat me like I was made of gold and poison at the same time. I'm not them." "No," he said. "But you live in their world, and they've made you doubt me. That's what scares me." Ava sat back, the walls between them suddenly more visible than ever. She wanted to reach out. She wanted to pull him close and say it didn't matter. But it did matter. Not because of the money. Not even because of the image. But because there was a part of him she didn't know. A part he was protecting. Or hiding. And that truth now lived in the quiet between their words. Ava arrived at the downtown office tower 10 minutes early, portfolio in hand, heels clicking with controlled confidence. She had been asked to represent her firm in a high-stakes collaboration between several companies and private investors. It was the kind of opportunity that could reset the narrative about her. Something big, public, and undeniably professional. The assistant led her through a glass hallway toward the main boardroom, her reflection doubling on either side, crisp and composed. She reminded herself to focus. This meeting wasn't about whispers or headlines. It was about work, and she had always been good at that. The boardroom doors swung open, revealing a long table with executives already seated, papers spread out, and glasses of water glistening in front of leather chairs. She walked in, scanning the faces as polite nods greeted her. Then a name was spoken. "And now, our lead silent partner has arrived." A tall man entered from the opposite door, wearing a dark navy suit cut so precisely it looked sculpted. He moved with quiet authority, his presence settling the room before he even spoke. And then Ava saw his face, James. Her breath caught before she could hide it. The room fell into a hush as several eyes darted between them. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He walked toward her, calm and composed, like this was just another Tuesday. She stood frozen as he reached her, his voice low but firm. "I told you what I have doesn't matter," he said, eyes steady on hers. "But now they care." Before she could respond, one of the executives gestured toward an open seat. "Shall we begin?" Ava sat, her spine stiff, her mind racing. The presentation started. Projected slides, profit margins, growth forecasts. But she barely heard a word. Her gaze drifted toward James, now seated across from her, calmly flipping through the briefing folder. It was like watching a stranger. The man she knew read quietly in the evenings and joked about bad coffee. This man controlled the room without saying more than 3 sentences. As the meeting continued, pieces started falling into place. James's last name had never come up in their conversations. She'd never pressed, and he'd never offered it. But when one of the board members mentioned the Whitmore portfolio, her stomach dropped. Whitmore. The name was everywhere, on foundations, libraries, real estate holdings, a legacy family, with old money and older headlines. A name tied to political influence, art patronage, and billion-dollar real estate developments. And James was part of it. She sat in stunned silence, forcing her face to remain neutral. When the meeting Finally adjourned, polite claps echoed and chairs scraped the floor. Ava stood slowly, her knees uncertain. James approached her quietly, away from the others, near the window that overlooked the skyline. "I didn't plan this," he said, reading the shock in her face. "Didn't plan to tell me either," she replied, voice sharp but soft enough not to carry. "I left it behind for a reason," he said. "That world, the pressure, the politics, the expectations, it almost broke me." She looked at him, pain and confusion tangled in her chest. "So you became someone else, completely?" "No," he said. "I just stopped performing." Flashbacks spun through her mind. The way he avoided certain topics, the way he never answered questions about family. The expensive art book on his shelf she thought was a gift. The volunteer projects, the passport stamps, all of it. It had been there. She just hadn't seen it. "Why didn't you trust me? With this?" she asked. "I wasn't hiding from you," he said. "I was protecting something real. You treated me like a person, not an asset, and I didn't want that to change." "But now it has," she whispered. James looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. "I wanted to be enough as I am." Ava stood still, the city behind them stretching out in silver lines and steel towers. She didn't know what to say. Everything felt different. And yet nothing had changed. He was still James. But now, so was the world around him. The headlines hit like wildfire. "Corporate star dating billionaire in disguise" was plastered across morning news segments. Gossip blogs and finance columns. Paparazzi photos appeared almost overnight. Ava stepping out of James's apartment. Ava and James walking through the park, even one from months ago where they sat sharing fries under a dim streetlight. The world had discovered the story and now it couldn't look away. Her inbox overflowed. TV producers requested interviews. Former classmates sent long, guilt-laced messages. And senior executives at her firm who once doubted her now spoke, in careful, overly warm tones. At first, she tried to ignore it. But even in meetings, attention drifted. Clients stared too long. Co-workers whispered again, not with judgment, but with awe. Like proximity to wealth had suddenly changed her value. It felt hollow, exhausting. Even when her name was reinstated on the new promotion list, the same position she was once silently excluded from, the offer came with an uncomfortable smile and a handshake that said, "We need you more now." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she texted James, "Let's talk, somewhere quiet." They met at a small rooftop garden above a bookstore James used to visit. It was quiet, just the hum of city life far below. Ava stood by the edge, arms folded, watching the sun dip behind buildings. James arrived wearing a simple jacket, no press, no entourage. Just him. She turned to him. "So now the whole world knows." He nodded. "It was only a matter of time." "You okay?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "Better now." They sat on a stone bench near the edge, surrounded by potted plants that had started to wilt in the cold. Ava waited for him to speak first. "I never meant to drag you into all this," he said finally. "The media, the noise. I just wanted something real." "I know," she said softly, "but it became bigger than us. I walked away from the money because I hated who it turned me into," he continued. "Entitled, angry, controlled. I needed to lose the noise to hear myself again." She looked at him. "And when you met me? You made me feel like I didn't need to explain myself," he said. "You didn't ask what I owned. You asked what I cared about. And that scared me, because it mattered more than anything else had in a long time." Ava was quiet. The city air wrapped around them. In stillness. "They think I won," she said after a pause. "That I dated my way to the top. That this was a fairy tale." He turned to her. "But you didn't want a fairy tale." "No," she said. "I wanted respect. And now Now it feels like I have it for all the wrong reasons. James placed a hand gently over hers. Then let's rewrite the story. She smiled faintly, then pulled out the letter she'd received from her firm. The official promotion contract. They offered it back. Full benefits, stock options, public congratulations. And? He asked. I turned it down, she said, looking him in the eye. James didn't flinch. Why? Because I don't want their version of success, she said quietly. It always came with conditions, with compromises. I want to build something that doesn't ask me to apologize for who I am or who I love. He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching into a knowing smile. Then come work with me, she raised an eyebrow. I mean it, he said. Not as a handout, as a partner. I need someone who sees people the way you do. The foundations, growing, education, housing, mentoring. You'd lead with purpose, and no one could question your worth. Ava leaned back, letting the wind move her hair from her face. That sounds terrifying. It's supposed to, James said. Big things always are. She looked out across the skyline, the city now beginning to light up one building at a time. Somewhere below, the old world still spun. Gossip, rankings, power games. But up here, it felt like something new. Ava exhaled slowly, then smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. Just faint and real. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't just surviving the story. She was writing it. The community center buzzed with laughter and movement, kids racing between tables covered in art supplies, while volunteers set up a projector for movie night. Ava stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, gently directing a team of interns, with a smile that carried calm authority. Her heels had been traded for sneakers, her schedule packed not with board meetings but mentorship sessions, scholarship interviews, and late-night calls with community organizers. This was a different kind of hustle. Slower, messier, but rooted in purpose. James walked in from the back with 2 boxes of donated laptops balanced in his arms. She met him with a quick nod, and together they set up for the next workshop, in sync without needing to say much. Months had passed since the headlines faded. In that time, Ava had built something of her own. Not just a program, but a space where overlooked talent thrived. A place where young girls didn't need perfect resume to be taken seriously. She and James co-led the foundation's new initiatives, each bringing their strengths. Where Ava brought structure, James brought vision. And somewhere in the rhythm of their new life, the noise of judgment disappeared. That evening, they were invited to a formal fundraiser hosted by one of the city's largest corporate collectives. Ava hadn't planned to attend, but a personal note had arrived, handwritten by the chairwoman herself, praising Ava's impact in the community and requesting her presence. She accepted, not for recognition, but to remind herself that she no longer needed anyone's permission to be in the room. They entered together, hand in hand, James in a classic black suit, Ava in a graceful navy dress. Heads turned again, but not in gossip. This time the room shifted with something else entirely. Respect, curiosity, admiration. People approached her, not with veiled remarks, but with genuine interest. A former professor, an old client. Even the executive who once joked about chauffeurs greeted her with a forced smile and too much eye contact. Then she spotted Nate, the coworker who once laughed loudest, standing by the drink table, a glass of wine in his hand, expression unreadable. He stepped forward cautiously. Ava, he said, clearing his throat. Didn't think I'd see you here. I could say the same, she replied, steady and cool. He glanced at James, then back at her. I guess I was wrong about a lot of things. She gave a small nod, neither dismissing nor embracing the comment. We all grow up eventually. Nate looked like he wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. He gave her a half smile and stepped aside. James leaned in, whispering with a grin, "Was that the guy who thought I was your Uber driver?" She chuckled. "That's the guy who couldn't find his way out of a spreadsheet without help." When the host took the mic and began introducing key figures, Ava and James moved to the side of the stage. Then, with a smile, the speaker gestured. To them. And finally, our newest partners in Real Impact, Ava Sinclair and James Whitmore. Applause followed. Not roaring, but sincere. People leaned forward. Photographers clicked. But James didn't flinch. He walked beside her calmly, not as a CEO, not as a reclusive heir, just as her partner. They stood together for a brief photo, hands touching at the side. Later, away from the crowd, they found a quiet alcove overlooking the garden lights strung across the patio. James removed his jacket, letting out a soft sigh. "You looked like you belonged up there." "I do belong up there," she said, her voice light. He turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You know I never hid from you, right?" She looked at him, her gaze steady. "I know. You hid from them." He nodded. "I was tired of being a title." She smiled, resting a hand on his chest. "Good thing I never listened to them." They stood in silence for a moment, everything soft around them. The lights, the music, the hum of life moving forward. Then he leaned down, and she rose slightly on her toes, and they kissed. Not with drama or fire, but with something deeper. Trust, clarity, peace. Sometimes love reveals what status can't. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real, powerful stories.